I got an email the other day from our bishop, Bishop Phil, that was sent to all the clergy in the diocese. And Bishop Phil recommended that we all watch the sermon from the National Prayer Service at the Washington National Cathedral, the sermon given by Bishop Marianne Budde. The occasion for the sermon was the National Prayer Service for a new president. It's the same service that has been held for every president since Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1933 at the inauguration. And President Trump was there along with his family, and Vice President J.D. Vance was there with his family. The National Cathedral is an Episcopal church, but it sees itself as sort of the chapel for our country. It calls itself a house of prayer for all people. There have been many ecumenical and interfaith services there, and the funerals of many presidents and Supreme Court justices. Just a little while back, we had Jimmy Carter's funeral that was held at the National Cathedral. So in many ways, it really is a national cathedral in the sense that many important spiritual events take place there. Important events for our country. And at the service last Tuesday, there was, of course, Episcopal clergy and mainline clergy, but there was also a Buddhist monk, a Muslim imam, a Hindu teacher, a Sikh minister, and the chief of the Episcopal tribe. And in other words, there were representatives from all parts of American life. And the prayers that were said in the service, which many of which came from the prayer book, were prayers for our whole country and for all in government, and especially, of course, for our president and vice president, who are beginning their terms. I watched a good deal of the service online, and it was impressive. The National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., with all the pomp and ceremony and pageantry, just beautiful. Most of the service actually was music, and it was splendid. There was a children's choir that sang like angels. There was a tenor with this wonderful voice, and he sang Ave Maria and the Lord's Prayer and some other things. There was a gospel choir, and there was a Jewish cantor, a Jewish rabbi who sang the prayers. And there were patriotic hymns. Star Spangled Banner, of course. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies. God of our fathers. So it was an amazing service. But what Bishop Phil pointed out to us was the sermon that Bishop Marianne Budde gave. She's the bishop of the Diocese of Washington, D.C. So this is her cathedral, her home church. And her sermon was on the unity of our country. She said there are three things necessary for unity. And one is to honor the dignity of every human being, because all of us are necessary for unity. And the second thing she said was to maintain honesty in public life and private life. And the third thing was to live with humility. So the three H's: honor, honesty, and humility. And at the end of her sermon, she spoke directly to President Trump. And she asked him to have mercy on those who are frightened now, for transgender children who are afraid, and for the children of immigrants, undocumented immigrants who are afraid that their parents might be taken away, and for refugees who are afraid of deportation. Well, this part of her sermon caused great controversy on social media. Some people said she was wrong to introduce partisanship into a national prayer service, and some people said she was speaking truth to power. So, wide variety of responses to the sermon. When I read the sermon, read the gospel today, I noticed that there was some resonance between it and Bishop Budde's sermon. In our gospel story, Jesus goes to Nazareth, his own hometown, and he goes to the synagogue to worship. And when it comes time for the reading of the scriptures, they hand him the scroll of the prophet Isaiah to read. Now he can choose any portion of the scroll to read, so he unrolls the scroll almost to the end, Isaiah 61, and he begins to read. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to bring release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind. Then when he's done, he rolls up the scroll and he gives it back to the attendant and he sits down, which is the normal posture for teaching or preaching. And he gives his sermon. It's a very short sermon. He says, today this prophecy is fulfilled in your hearing. In other words, what he's saying is that he is the one who Isaiah was talking about 500 years before. He is the one who is to come to preach good news to the poor, to be anointed, to have the Spirit of the Lord upon him. Well, you can imagine this might not go over real well in his own hometown. This is Nazareth, the village where he was raised. He was a neighborhood kid. They know him from when he was a young man. And, who is he to speak like this? And besides, who is he to have such a grand mission to take on himself? In fact, they're so upset with him, they grab him and they try to throw him off the cliff outside of town. But he walks through the midst of them and goes on his way, the story says. Well, what Jesus is doing in his sermon is the same thing that Isaiah did 500 years before. Isaiah was speaking to a people who had just come out of the exile and were trying to reestablish the nation of Israel once again. And it wasn't working. They were oppressed, they were downtrodden, and he was speaking words of hope to them. He says, God has anointed me to speak out for the oppressed and the poor. And the Spirit of God is upon me, and I have to speak out. And I'm sure that the people of Israel objected to what he was saying too. He said, well, who do you think you are to speak like that to us? Who gave you this wisdom and this power? But Isaiah had to speak. He couldn't hold it in. And I wonder if Bishop Budde felt like that when she was preparing her sermon. I have to speak. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. Yesterday, our family, we held our monthly Zoom meeting, and my nephew, Will, was there. Will is a teacher in the 6th grade in the Boulder County schools in Colorado. And someone asked him if he thought the new executive orders would affect him. And he said, well, at our school, we are preparing in case ICE comes to take some of our kids away in Immigration Customs Enforcement. And he said, our plan is that if they come, we're going to ask them to wait until we can get our lawyers to come to make sure everything's done right. And then we're going to announce that there'll be no passing periods in the halls, nobody in the halls until the ICE team has finished their business. And then after it's over, we're going to try to explain to the kids what has happened. Now I can just imagine what it would be like for those kids. Both the kids who were taken out of the school and for the kids who saw it happen. And of course their families as well. Well, we live in a time of great change, and we don't know what's in store for us. But I hope that all Americans will remember that we're part of one country, one body. We depend on each other. And I hope that we'll be able to live together and in peace and honor the dignity of every human being, as Bishop Budde said. There's a prayer in the prayer book, the prayer for the whole human family, page 815, that I think is especially appropriate at this time, and I'd like to close with that. O God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love, and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on